All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is not going to be very long, but in keeping with the idea of having these little mini seminars, I thought I'd point out for you some different topics. Today, we're going to talk about the National Football League, which is actually a humongous business, as you can well imagine. The league itself got started in 1920. Okay, so it's been around for a long, long time. Um, and it eventually merged with the American Football League. So there's only one professional football league in the US, and that's the NFL. Um, the most recent information I have comes from 2014. So I'm going to have to use that for purposes of illustration. Um, In 2014, the NFL had revenue of approximately $18 billion. All right. Um, the NFL consists of uh, independently owned teams that elect a commissioner. In this case, it's Roger Goodell. Um, he is currently paid $34 million. Now, he just went back and asked for a raise, and he was asking for 50 million. He was also asking for use of a private jet and health care for the rest of his life for he and his family. All that being said, um, I don't remember how it worked out. I don't think he got the 50 million, but he did get a big increase. So the question is, well, where do the funds come from? And as you well imagine, the most lucrative part of it is coming from TV rights. And Fox, CBS, and NBC back in 2014 paid about $3 billion for broadcast rights. ESPN kicked in another 1.9 billion for their rights. So right there, you got almost $5 billion of the 13 billion. To compare that, just for purposes of understanding where things are coming from, Major League Baseball brought in revenue of 95 billion. The Premier Soccer League, 53 billion. The NBA, 4.8 billion. So you can see, as far as the NFL is concerned, it's way far behind Major League Baseball, and it's behind Premier League Soccer, but it is 4 times as much as the NBA. So the rest of the money, where does it come from? Sponsorships, TV we already talked about, tickets obviously. It was up till recently the proceeds that the NFL had were not really taxable. And the reason for that is that the NFL was until recently a nonprofit organization. And as such, they don't have to pay income tax. Now, the individual teams, on the other hand, they do have to pay income tax. And even though most of the teams are owned by individuals, they're still taxable. The NFL went from being a nonprofit organization to being a for-profit organization that's private just in the last year or so. And the reason they did that was they were tired of sharing their financial information. Because even if you're a nonprofit organization, the public has the right to look at your financial information. And the NFL basically was kind of tired of that. So the way they function is that the individual teams pay dues to the NFL. And that also, the teams pay the officials and whatnot, and all the expenses. But the NFL itself is not taxable, or wasn't until recently. Um, The players, what do they get? Well, it works out, at least in 2014, the players were getting about 55% of the media income. They were getting about 45% of the NFL mobile apps, the NFL.com, postseason game revenue, and they were getting about 40% of the local revenue, which would be the ticket sales, local sales, and so forth. Excuse me. All teams are private, with the exception of one, which is the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay Packers are owned by the fans. They buy stock just like you would with any other company, and the stock is traded. You have to find someone willing to sell their stock in order to be able to buy it. No new stock has been issued. And I'm going to show you some of their financial results in just a moment. 2016 is when they gave up their nonprofit status, and they estimate they're going to lose about $10 million in tax savings. But the big advantage is they get to keep their books private, and that's why they did that. Another example of that was Burger King. A long time ago, Burger King was publicly traded, and the largest stockholder in Burger King was BlackRock, and they decided to take the company private so management could focus on growing the company instead of trying to worry about dealing with investors and whatnot. So they went private, and the company has had record revenue since then. Now, the question is, as far as the value of the individual teams, first of all, each team is owned by an individual or an investor group. The average net worth of an NFL owner is approximately $5 billion. Now, you would think that the owner of the Dallas Cowboys would be the most wealthy of all the owners, and it turns out that's not true. It's actually Paul Allen, owner of the Seahawks. Paul Allen, of course, is one of the original employees of Microsoft, and his net worth was estimated to be almost $16 billion. The poorest of the owners happens to be the Oakland team, and Carol Davis and her husband, they own that. Their net worth is estimated to be about $500 million. So obviously it's a rich person's sport by any stretch of the imagination. The average value of a team out there was about roughly $3 billion. Now, of course, it varies from team to team. The Cowboys are the most valuable at right around $5 billion, and it goes on down from there. Carolina Panthers was either recently up for sale or has been sold. They were looking for $2.8 billion for the sales, for the purchase of the team. I think ultimately the offer came in at $2.2 billion, which is certainly not an insignificant amount. It's interesting to note that all the NFL teams, with the exception of one, are owned by white businessmen. Okay, there's only one team out there that has a person of color who owns it, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. That particular owner has a net worth of, if I remember correctly, $1.9 billion. So, all this being said, in recent news, of course, the amount of people that are viewing NFL games is declining, which is going to cut into revenue and so forth. The amount the networks are willing to pay to broadcast the games is actually decreasing, so that's going to be another hit. Part of the reason most analysts are saying that the revenues are down is all the controversy involving the players taking a knee during the national anthem. And of course, Donald Trump has a total dislike for that, so he's blasting them right and left. So a lot of his political base members are boycotting games and so forth. There was a move of a team just recently to Las Vegas, and they're hoping that that's going to revitalize some of the interest in the games and so forth. So I promise you that I was going to, as soon as I can pull it up here, show you some information about the Green Bay Packers. And I'll pull it up here now. Green Bay Packers are owned by the fans, basically. And you can go online and do a search for Green Bay Packers financial statements, and you get all sorts of hits. This is an article issued by the Green Bay Packers about their most recent financial statements. And as you can see, they're providing you net income of $24 million. Their net income rose $24 million. Last year it was $49 million, and this year it was $73 million. And a big part of that was the move of the team, the Rams and Chargers moving to LA and the Raiders to Las Vegas. Those relocation fees that were charged, those particular teams and the incentives from the various cities, those all went into the hopper, and they get shared out with all the teams, and that accounted for about $20-something million in additional net income for the Packers. All three of those happening in the same year generated a huge sum of money. Anyway, if you were to take that odd and unusual event out of their financial statements, their net income actually would have fallen a little bit, about $3 million. Net income, as you know, is the net profit after paying all the expenses. So that's nothing to sneeze at. $46 million in profit is pretty darn good. They had a decrease in the profit from operations, and the article goes on to tell you about that. The biggest one, no surprise here, is the cost of the players themselves has increased dramatically. They had a few really large contract signings, and that's just kind of the nature of the business. The Packers are not unique, but because they're publicly traded, you get to have more information. And the Packers have a charitable aspect as well. In fact, they purposely try to give back to Green Bay, Wisconsin, and last year they contributed almost $8 million to the local charities and so forth, which I think is pretty cool thing to have happen. Their total revenue, which is up from last year, came out about $400 million. Okay, this means that if you take their net income, which on a normal year would be maybe 40-something million, based on their total revenue, they have about a 10% return on the investment. And a 10% return is really, really good. Dallas Cowboys, totally much larger. But in the same token, they're not publicly traded, so it's hard to get that information. It's like a record label. You might try to find out information about a record label, and you find out you can't because it's invariably owned by a larger company. And so the individual results are not that clear. So that's my brief, very brief summary of the NFL and how they make their money and so forth. All sorts of innovation is going to have to take place in order to drive up revenue, seeing how their market share is declining. A lot of attention is being spent on the football stadiums themselves. The Orlando Magic has been doing something similar. In fact, we had a speaker come from the Magic talking about some of the technology things they're doing to try to drive additional sales, and not the least of which is the little transmissions coming out from various food vendors. So as you walk by with your smartphone, you start getting, advertisements as to the daily special and all that sort of stuff. The idea is to try to drive you to the counter. Also, more fan-based activities, special memberships that allow you to literally go down on the court before the game, special birthday incentives and things along that line. So what was basically a monopoly for decades is no longer. Other people are looking for other types of entertainment, and like any good entertainment business, the NFL has to evolve in order to keep pace with where the entertainment dollars are going. So that is my presentation for you. I'm going to stop the recording, but if anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask me. Let me go ahead and stop the recording though.